Over at MSNBC, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski are pretty nervous about Cornel West's presidential run. But don't worry, because Al Sharpton offers some wise words. Let's take a look.
George W. Bush would have never been elected in 2000 without Ralph Nader. Donald Trump would have never been elected in 2016 without Jill Stein. I'm wondering in 2024, will we be looking back saying Donald Trump would have never been reelected and continued his assault on American democracy, except for the candidacy of, say, Cornel West or...
So one thing, I think we talked about this last week with Freddie DeBoer, but no one ever blames the centrist Dems who voted for Bush.
Yeah, the 250,000 Democrats, I believe it was, who voted for Bush in Florida, Democrats. No one ever says that. Or Al Gore himself, who had gone for a full state recount, almost certainly would have won, but didn't want to go for a full state recount because he didn't want to seem like he was disruptive to the system.
Right,
so,
a bad player, bad team player. Yeah. Right, it's only Nader. Okay.
There, but let's just talk about Cornel West. How devastating is it if Cornel takes 2, 3, 4% from Joe Biden in 2024?
Joe, I think if he takes that 2 to 3%, it's going to be from the constituencies that we just talked about. And I think that could absolutely make the difference. Donald Trump will be elected or not reelected, I think, based upon no labels and Green Party's Cornel West. I don't think there's any question about his inability to get a majority of the American electorate and a majority of the electoral
This guy's from Harvard.
Those close to the president are far more concerned about a Cornel West figure or the professor himself stealing away just enough progressive, young votes, black votes, whatever it might be, to tip the scales.
But I think the way you handle this is, do we, with Donald Trump looming, do we want to make a statement or do we want a government? And I think that you've got to talk to people just that clear. We absolutely need to make statements, but do we do it at the expense of losing government? A government that we see is bent on erasing everything that was won for blacks, for women, for gays since the civil rights movement. And I think you take this head on. Rather than ignore it, rather than having something wrong with your body and you don't go to the doctor, you deal with the potential problem, you deal with the issues that are being raised, which may be the reason they're running. And if you deal with the issues, I think that you have people will make a real mature decision.
That actually kind of surprised me. Okay, well, what are your... I mean, that last part, he actually seemed to be saying deal with the critiques that they're making.
I think that's because Al Sharpton, whatever his problems, has a much better grasp than almost every single other person in the political sphere that would be on MSNBC, of the sort of subset of the population that doesn't often vote, that's sort of shaky on voting, and that is critical of the Democrats, at least as it concerns the black working class and black young people. And I think he uncertainly knows, even though he used the phrase steal, or someone used the phrase steal, that, you can't steal a vote. You have to earn a vote one way or the other. And so if the perception is that the Biden administration is not actually doing anything for these people, of course he won't get the vote. And of course, somebody else might be able to get those votes. So I'm not super shocked by it, but I think the whole discussion...
Well, what's shocking is that it's on MSNBC.
But they have to let some things through in MSNBC, because since that's the liberal network of choice, they have to give the liberals some sense of like, how do we actually succeed? As opposed to just the normal blowhard nonsense that they have going on. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just so wrapped in so many tropes, from that you steal votes. What is that? Like, there is no... Prior to the election, there's no like vote bank that you control. You have to earn them. I mean, secondarily, and to some degree, to speak to what Sharpton is saying, I mean, they're not really addressing the big issue at all. That the Biden administration and the White House, which claims to be the best White House ever for the black working class, unemployment, all these other things that they claim to be saying, Bidenomics, the economy is so great, they're fighting for this, they're fighting for that. I mean, if they're so great, why is the White House freaking out that they're not going to be able to get more votes from black people and potentially lose the election because of it? And as I pointed out before several times, in the past 2 elections, you can go to liberationschool.org, and you can read some of my analysis on the 2020 election. In the past 2 elections, what you have is a decline in either both the share or the percentage or both in almost every single area that's majority Black people, cities, counties, and so on and so forth. So you can already see that there's a distinct erosion happening in the people who vote, not to mention the large number of people who don't vote or don't vote regularly. So why is it that the so-called best ever, when Trump is so bad, is still having trouble? I mean, it's basically acting as if the actual experiences of the people they're talking about don't matter at all. Because again, if Trump is so bad and the Democrats are so great, it shouldn't even, why would they even be worried about Cornel West? So I think that's the most interesting thing, is that they're basically admitting that the Biden administration, which, you know, I think on most of the issues that were mentioned were undoubtedly you know, they're probably doing better than Trump, but that ultimately that is such a low bar that in the context of how big the crisis is, especially in urban America, you know, people are not moved by it, because they're basically saying we're not even getting close to what you need. But since we're further ahead than the other guy, you should give us credit for not solving the problems that you have.
Yeah, it's the but Trump philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, which, by the way, I mean, we could go back longer than this, but let's just go back to Ronald Reagan in 1980. The Democrats have sold a lesser of two evils every single election, and somehow the politics have only gone further to the right. So when people say, well, don't support these third-party candidates, don't do this, don't do that, I mean, quite frankly, when you look at the times where, you know, the most left-wing sort of pushes were coming, that's in the times where there were the most sort of left-wing opposition politics. I mean, this was certainly the case in 1936 in Franklin Roosevelt's election. It was absolutely the case in 1948 when Harry Truman was elected. It was absolutely the case in 1964. You know, in some ways it was the case during both Nixon presidencies, even though he tapped a deep vein of the right wing, extreme racism. He also was throwing out universal health care, the EPA, all these other things to try to speak to the fact that there is a huge extra parliamentary opposition. You could also say the same thing is true in 2020, that the issue, the Biden campaign, the uprising against race, the uprising against racism, the COVID issue, the Bernie campaign, all of these things went to give a certain cast to how the Biden administration came in and put out Build Back Better. So there really is actually no evidence when we look at the actual history that if you have a further right, lesser of two evils, blah, 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 that you're going to get a more progressive reality, when in fact, what you're going to get is an increasingly rightward moving show. And it's only when the system itself, the establishment from both sides, feels deeply shaken by the mass uprising of the people represented in the streets and at the ballot box, that they then start saying, oh, we better give people something to appease them. So, I mean, ultimately, if what you really want is a more progressive United States, you're probably better off giving more support to third-party candidates and forcing the others to respond, you know, to that reality. So I don't know. There's more we could say about that, but there's
interesting. Yeah, hot take. Interesting. I mean, I thought we were just gonna be riffing and laughing, but Eugene is too smart for that.
I only drop facts. It's too serious out here.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
right.
We don't.
We gotta.
Exactly. It's true. It's true. But we use the humor to bring people in. I mean, we could have a whole debate over that because, but we'll save that for another show.
We could. Yeah. We did have a debate over that in the 2020.
We did. Yeah, you're right.
You can remember I won handily, and that others who made many claims turned out to be false.
Right.
Actually, especially around the Iran deal. Won't say any names, but you know, some spurious claims were made, and it turned out they were wrong, and I was right.
It was an incorrect prediction that Biden would return to the Iran deal.
Yes, and I was told I was bad. I wanted Iranian kids to die because I wouldn't vote for Biden. So you go back and look that up. You look who said that, and you know, there it is.